In this video, we're going to talk about why the narcissist needs to create chaos. Social media content will have you believe that the narcissist intentionally creates a chaotic situation in order to throw you off. In other words, that if they create chaos, you're not able to think, right? And if you can't think, you can't really use logic. So then you make irrational decisions. And in essence, what it all boils down to is that this is their way to control and manipulate you. So again, typically chaos is linked or reduced to, like many things are in terms of looking at different facets of narcissism, it all gets reduced down to it's an attempt to control and manipulate you. What if their primary object, that is the most important person in their formative years, is experienced as disruptive and therefore in their mind comes to represent chaos, or stated differently, emotional turmoil? Picture this scenario. A child grows up with an alcoholic parent, maybe even two alcoholic parents. Maybe you could fill in the blank here. Picture that the parents or the caregivers are separated, right? Or there's a divorce. And this child lives with one of the parents, let's say they live with their mother, who's pursuing an unavailable man, right? So in her pursuit of the unavailable man, she moves the child from state to state to state because she's chasing a fantasy. But what this creates between the alcoholism, the constant movement, the pursuit of an unavailable man, the lack of boundaries and rules, all of this creates, as you can begin to imagine, a very chaotic situation. This is the kind of person who as an adult would say, I had a mother who was bipolar. Now they don't really mean diagnostically bipolar, but what they mean is that they had a caregiver whose emotions changed quite rapidly. They were up and down, they were emotionally labile, in part due to the alcoholism and probably due to a personality disorder in the caregiver as well. What I'm trying to emphasize is unstable caregiver, unstable feelings. So let me say that again, because in essence, this is the sort of what I'm putting forward, is that one of the reasons that people create these chaotic relationships is unstable caregiver, unstable emotional state, unstable feelings, unstable affective experiences. Let me break this all down for you. I want to break this down because I could imagine this is a radically different way for you to think about chaos in a relationship. And I'm sure you never thought about it in terms of seeking the primary caregiver or seeking an affective state. But I'm going to explain all this. Welcome everybody. This is the Narcissism Decoder, a YouTube channel that's designed to help you look at the various facets of narcissism from a very different angle. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella, and in today's video, we're going to look at why the narcissist needs to create chaos. I wanted to start off a descriptive picture. In other words, what does this look like? How does it present itself? And then from there, I want to go into a few of the psychological reasons why an individual needs to create this kind of environment in the relationship. Descriptively speaking, picture this scenario. Nothing that you do is good enough for your caregiver. Even though this is what you did, let's just say like yesterday or last week, and it was fine when you did this before. For some reason today, it's no longer good enough, and you are then heavily criticized or constantly criticized for what it is that you do or you don't do, or how you say something or how you don't say something. It could be something as subtle as the intonation or your posture, the tone of your voice. The point is that you try very hard, let's say, to follow the rule or to do what just works naturally in many different relationships. But when you think you're following the rules, it turns out the rules change, right? In other words, you're following the rules, but you're still getting criticized. The reason that this happens is because the criticism, the arguing, and the chaos that ensues is not about the rules or following the rules. It's about the need for emotional turmoil. In other words, a tumultuous state of mind. That's the chaos. And that's the most important thing in this relationship. If you know somebody like this, or you have somebody like this in your life, what you begin to recognize is that ordinary distressing things of life, like inequality, just things that are unfair that may happen to you, become opportunities for very stimulating, overwhelming chatter and talk and discussion, right? In other words, they sort of grow a life of their own. They get transformed into what, in my field, in the field of psychoanalysis, we call self-stimulating objects. Hold on to that just for a moment. I introduced the word object, which may be a little confusing, but I'll break it down as we go along. Conversely, think about this scenario. You get stuck in a way of thinking about things. Again, ordinary distressing things of life that maybe even other people could find pleasant. Like, for instance, you get a job offer, double your salary, and you find yourself thinking and thinking and thinking about it. Like, how am I going to get to the city? Maybe, the job is in the city and you live in the suburbs, for instance, right? But the main point is you get into a little fender bender, for instance, but this turns into a major catastrophe. The main goal here, believe it or not, is this relentless thinking and talking about it, right? It becomes self-tormenting. This has often been referred to as chuntering, right? The chuntering is a way to create this inner torment, right? This inner turmoil where you're just constantly obsessing and ruminating about something and then talking about it in a way that's sort of endless or fruitless. Sometimes when we talk about things, it brings a sense of relief or a deeper sense of understanding, a sense of calm, because it feels good maybe to get it out and have somebody appreciate that. But this kind of talking that I'm describing here, this is not designed to bring calm. This is designed to bring chaos, to escalate. The whole goal is to flood your mind and flood the mind of the listener. So we could see how now this inner turmoil gets played out intrapsychically. That's the chuntering that I just described. And interpersonally. That's with your partner, somebody you know, a loved one, a parent. The whole point is then to pull somebody in to this tormented state of mind of you. And by the way, if you do know somebody like this is the kind of person who says, I just want to talk about this. I just like to talk about things, but I want to remind you that this is not talking. When language is used symbolically, in other words, you're able to express something on a symbolic level, which gives you a little distance from the sort of emotional, affective charge that comes along with something like this, like a little fender bender or promotion at work. But this is not designed to do that, as I mentioned earlier. This is designed to bring you or somebody else into a very moving, emotional experience that escalates as you get deeper and deeper into it. So let's shift gears now and address the second question that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. What are the psychological reasons? What are the motivations? Why does somebody do this sort of thing, this chuntering, this thinking, creating this emotional turmoil? Again, if you look at the social media content, you'll see they raise questions like, why do narcissists need to create chaos? But I want to think about more deeply. I want to think more deeply about some of the things that you'll typically hear if you do this kind of review. So one of the things you may hear is, you get addicted to this kind of chaos. So when you get into a relationship without this kind of chaos, it's not easy. Now, I want to highlight something here because this is very significant, and this sort of goes like under the radar, which is if you get addicted to this kind of chaos in your relationship, it means that not only does the narcissist in your life bring chaos into your relationship, it also implies that you too need this level of chaos. In other words, it's like a folie à deux. It's two people that get mixed into this together. And that's why it takes on this synergistic effect. Now, I know you may be saying, no, not me, I don't want this. And that may be true. And perhaps you'll even exit the relationship. But for those of you who feel stuck in this kind of relationship, and again, according to the social media content, you come to miss it, implies that you too may need this for your own reason. Now, another thing I typically hear is that these individuals will create chaos because they have a chaotic inner world. Now, I would say to that, that's true, right? But we want to, again, think about this in a more complicated way. If they have a chaotic inner world, why do they need to create external chaos? Now, remember what I said earlier, inter, right? It does go on inside of oneself and gets played out interpersonally. But I want you to pay close attention to something. I mean, this is something I notice, and I'm curious if you will notice this as well, is if they have this inner chaos, so therefore they need to create chaos, why do they need to create more chaos if they already have so much chaos going on inside of them? See, that's something to think about. And with that, you may want to try to pay attention to, when does this chaos arise? And if this is something that you experience, then the question becomes, when do you start this chuntering, right? Now, what I have observed is that it happens more often than not in downtime, in moments of separation, in moments when, there's not much going on in one's life. Maybe on a Sunday afternoon, for instance, you start thinking about work. This is, by the way, what we call in my field, the Sunday neurosis. Most people mistakenly believe that they're anxious about work, and that's why on Sunday they begin thinking about That's not the case, at least not in my experience. What I've discovered is very close to what we're talking about here today, which is when there are moments of downtime, when things get quiet. See, that's when there's so where's the chaos then, right? But then there's a feeling of aloneness that becomes intolerable. But if you can then create this chuntering, this thinking and anxiety, right? You are no longer alone. This brings us back now to where we started this video, seeking the primary object, seeking the feeling, the affective state of what? Chaos, right? That's what I mentioned. Now you're saying, why would I want to do that? It's so unpleasant. And I'm with you. It is very unpleasant. And I'll talk about this in much more detail in a subsequent video. But at the very least, I want to leave you with this impression that you do it not intentionally, number one. It's not like you consciously wake up in the morning and your mind is already racing. And you say, I'm going to wake up with a racing mind. Or it's a nice Sunday afternoon and you say, I'm going to start worrying about my work week. No. But what happens is there is a feeling inside of you when things get quiet of aloneness, a feeling of aloneness that has not yet been mastered. So then, instead of feeling painfully alone, you bring back the primary object, or stated differently, the primary affect. Remember, the affect is associated with an object. So I'm not saying that it's not one or the other. By the way, they're both inside of us. They both get internalized, both the primary caregiver and the affective feeling that comes along when you're with this caregiver. And if you could bring this back, then guess what? You're not alone. You have company. Anyway, look, I hope I got you thinking about this in a slightly more complicated way. For the next video, if you could stay tuned, I want to go over this even in more detail. Perhaps this was enough for you already, and that's fine. But what I'd like to do is make the link between seeking this primary feeling, right, and creating a state of confusion. Because again, it's typically known that when you're with people like this, that the way they questioned what you do, your motive, the way you said something to them, the intonation of your voice, what you implied, what they think you meant when you really didn't mean something, the way they heard it. All of this creates a very confused state of mind. But I don't want to leave it there. I don't want to say that the narcissist just tries to confuse you so they can manipulate and control you. No, that's not enough. I think that's too reductionistic. I'm not saying it never happens. There is, of course, a level of control and manipulation. But what I'm saying is, I want to really encourage you to think about the confusion, but I want you to think about it in a different way. Confusion. See what I'm getting at? Try, think about it. Maybe you could figure this out. If not, stay tuned for the next video on the Narcissism Dakota. Okay, I shall see you soon. Bye for now.